Realize this. Nobody thinks about your life more than you do. There is a silence before the turning, a stillness before the moment breaks. But ask yourself, how long have you been sitting in that stillness, hoping someone else would notice the weight you're carrying? How many mornings have you woken up with a fire in your chest and no one to hand you a map? The truth is brutal. Nobody is coming to rescue you. Nobody is losing sleep over your potential, your pain, or the promises you've been too afraid to keep to yourself. And that should burn. It should tear through the illusion that help is on the way. Because only when that illusion dies does your true life begin. The Stoics warned us, reliance on external validation is the fastest road to internal ruin. You suffer not because others abandoned you, but because you expected them not to. You thought your effort deserved attention. You thought your silence meant someone would ask if you're okay. But silence isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It reveals exactly where your strength must be built. So here's the question. Are you finally ready to stop waiting and start rising? Or are you still hoping someone will hand you what you were born to earn? If that question made something shift inside you, please subscribe. Because this space is built for people ready to take full responsibility for their lives. The Stoic path is narrow, steep, and quiet, but it leads to something unshakable. Also, consider subscribing if you're done performing, done explaining, and ready to become. Most people carry a quiet expectation that someone will eventually notice their struggle. They believe that if they just keep showing up, if they just keep putting in the work, someone, somewhere, will finally say, "I see you." Maybe they won't admit it out loud, but it lingers beneath the surface, hidden in the way they hesitate before taking the next step, as if waiting for applause that never comes. They imagine that consistency will be rewarded with encouragement, that their quiet efforts will be recognized in time. But time passes, and silence remains. No applause, no validation. And slowly, that silence begins to feel like a punishment. That's when disappointment grows, not from the absence of support, but from the presence of expectation. You didn't fail. You expected someone to care as much as you do. That's where the ache lives, not in what's missing, but in what you assumed would arrive. The mind is clever. It builds stories around absence, painting silence as rejection, detachment as disrespect. But what if the truth is simpler and less personal than you imagined? People are not ignoring you out of cruelty. They are consumed by their own survival. They are buried under their own distractions, their own plans, their own pain. They're not overlooking your effort because it doesn't matter. They're not even looking. And that realization, while heavy at first, is the one that sets you free. Because when you stop waiting to be seen, you start seeing yourself. When you stop hoping someone will understand your path, you begin to walk it with certainty. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. The world is not against you, it's just preoccupied. That's not a tragedy, it's an opportunity. Because once you see it clearly, you're no longer trapped in the illusion that recognition is owed to you. You let go of the mental contract you never signed with anyone, and you begin to move without the weight of imagined audiences. The expectation dissolves, and in its place, something stronger forms. Self-respect. Not the kind that needs to be confirmed from the outside. The kind that stands on its own, even in silence. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength," he wasn't offering a comforting idea. He was pointing directly at the core of your suffering, the belief that something outside you must shift before you can. But when you accept that others are not responsible for noticing your growth, your pain, or your progress, something settles. There's no more guessing, no more hoping, just forward motion. There's peace in that, even if it's a quiet kind. This clarity isn't cold. It's not detachment for the sake of ego. It's the end of waiting. It's the beginning of authorship. You stop writing the story where someone comes along and lifts you out of the fog. You stop rehearsing the scene where they finally understand. You start writing the version where you get up and build, not because anyone is watching, but because the work still matters. You keep going, not for recognition, but for alignment. You show up because showing up is who you've chosen to become. And yes, it might still hurt sometimes, because we are wired to want connection, to want someone to see what we've carried and how far we've come. But that want doesn't have to become a need. It doesn't have to anchor you in resentment or stagnation. You can want connection while still being whole without it. That's the shift. You don't become bitter when no one notices. You become better at noticing yourself. You become sharper in your discipline, quieter in your intentions, and firmer in your direction. This is not about hardening. It's about refining. You shed the part of you that was quietly waiting to be rescued. You let go of the belief that your journey needs a witness to be real, because some of the most powerful growth happens when no one is there to clap for it. Some of the most important victories will never be posted, shared, or praised. And that's okay. The real weight of your life is carried in private. Seneca once said, "The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." And in the same way, the person who releases the fantasy of recognition removes the sting of its absence. You already know what must be done. You already know where you're headed. The clarity is inside you. And once you accept that the world won't always echo your value, you stop shouting into the void hoping it'll answer back. Instead, you begin to listen inward. You begin to trust the quiet. You begin to create momentum without needing permission. That's when strength takes root. Not in the loud moments of public success, but in the silent hours of private alignment. This is the kind of strength that doesn't beg to be noticed. It just moves. It just builds. It just is. And maybe one day the world will see what you've become, maybe not. But by then, it won't matter. Because the person you're becoming isn't fueled by attention. They're fueled by something deeper: duty, clarity, integrity. This is the work that endures. This is what it means to focus on yourself, not with arrogance, but with quiet commitment, to carry your weight without resentment, to move without applause, to live from the inside out. And once you taste that kind of clarity, you never go back. Think about how much of your life has quietly been spent on hold, not in motion, not in chaos, just suspended, waiting for someone to finally understand what you're trying to do, waiting for a nod of approval that tells you it's okay to keep going, waiting for a message, a sign, a green light that never really comes. And it doesn't feel like waiting at first. It feels strategic. It feels safe. You tell yourself you're just being patient, just biding your time until the conditions are right. But days pass, then months, then years, and what started as preparation becomes hesitation in disguise. The truth is, waiting doesn't protect you from failure. It just delays your progress. It drains your energy in quiet ways, convincing you that stalling is the same as planning. That stillness is wisdom when really it's fear wearing a wise face. The longer you wait for someone to understand your vision, the less connected you become to it. You start questioning whether your idea is even worth pursuing if no one else sees it. But understand this: most people won't see your vision because it wasn't given to them. It was given to you. You are the one meant to carry it, shape it, build it. And that job comes with the burden of being misunderstood, at least for a while. The more you depend on being seen to move forward, the more fragile your direction becomes. Because then your path isn't built on clarity, it's built on reaction. built on the hope that someone else will confirm it first. You wait for the right moment because you assume that confidence comes from timing, but it doesn't. Confidence is built by motion, not approval, by doing the thing before you feel ready, by acting in the absence of certainty. That's what makes it real. That's what turns hesitation into strength. You want to know when the right time is? It's the moment you stop asking for one. That's when something shifts. You stop scanning the outside world for signs and start listening inward. You start honoring your own conviction more than the silence around you. That's where focus begins, not in a perfect moment, but in the decision to stop waiting for one. When Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes," he wasn't just speaking in metaphors. He was describing the exact turning point where your power begins. Because as long as your attention is scattered across what others think, say, or approve of, you're not anchored in anything. You're trying to borrow clarity instead of building it. But when you stop reaching outward and turn inward, something becomes steady. The noise fades, the doubt quiets, and your energy finally starts moving in a straight line. That's when real progress begins. Quiet, uneventful, but consistent. You start making decisions without asking for confirmation. You start building things without announcing them. You stop checking in with the world before taking the next step. And suddenly, everything becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. Because you're not entangled in imagined reactions anymore. You're not designing your life to be validated. You're building it to be lived. The truth is, you've always known what you needed to do. It was never a mystery. The problem was never clarity. The problem was permission. You were waiting for someone to hand you the right moment, like a pass to move forward. But no one's coming with that. Not because they don't care, but because they're waiting for their own. Everyone's locked in their own world, hoping for the same thing. That's why the people who rise are the ones who stop waiting and start walking. And the moment you take that step, without being invited, without being affirmed, something clicks. You're no longer moving because it feels right to others. You're moving because it's time. Even if you stumble, even if it's messy, that kind of action generates momentum. And momentum is sacred. Because once it starts, it feeds itself. It gives you the evidence that you're capable, not because someone told you, but because you showed yourself. There's a reason Epictetus taught that no great thing is created suddenly, because everything worthwhile, clarity, focus, identity, is built in the small, unseen decisions you make when nobody is watching, when no one is checking in, when there is no confirmation, no applause, no audience. The people who get far are not the ones who waited to feel sure. They're the ones who moved anyway. And over time, that movement became character. It's easy to believe that waiting is harmless, that you're just being thoughtful, just waiting for the right alignment. But waiting has a cost. It steals time. It feeds doubt. It reinforces the idea that you're not allowed to begin until the world tells you it's okay. And the longer you live in that space, the harder it becomes to break free from it. Because waiting becomes a comfort zone, a quiet place where you can imagine, plan, and analyze without consequence. But nothing changes there. Nothing evolves. Nothing is tested. Eventually, you realize that the only thing standing between you and the next version of yourself is the belief that you're not ready yet. And that belief isn't protecting you. It's holding you still. The strength you need won't come before you start. It will come because you started. That's the paradox. Action teaches. Action clarifies. Action exposes the gaps and fills them. It humbles you and empowers you at the same time. Seneca once said, "While we wait for life, life passes." That line isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up. The life you're hoping to step into doesn't arrive at your door. It's built moment by moment by the one who chooses to stop hesitating, even in confusion, even in fear, even in silence, especially in silence, because that's where you learn to trust your own voice above all else. And once you do, something stabilizes. You no longer need constant confirmation. You're not swayed by every opinion or paused by every doubt. You move from something internal now, and that movement begins to carry weight, not just in what you do, but in who you become. You stop checking the world for permission. You stop waiting to be told you're enough. You just begin, quietly, intentionally. And that's where everything changes. When nobody is watching, something uncomfortable begins to happen. You're left alone with your own intentions. There's no one to impress. No scoreboard, no echo of approval. The motivation that once came from being observed disappears, and what's left is bare, just you and the work. That silence can be deafening at first. You might start to wonder if the effort still matters without anyone to witness it. But that's exactly the test. Because when applause disappears, you begin to see the truth. Were you doing it for progress, or were you doing it for praise? When the eyes are gone, so is the performance. What remains is the essence of discipline, not as show, but as structure. It's in those quiet, invisible repetitions that character is forged. Not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet follow-throughs no one talks about. There is a kind of emotional discomfort that settles in when your work no longer generates validation. That unease can be sharp. You're used to small feedback loops, likes, compliments, reactions. When they vanish, you feel exposed, as if the energy you're spending isn't going anywhere. But that discomfort isn't a signal to stop. It's the sign you're in the right place. You've stepped into the space where growth actually begins. Without an audience, the only voice left is your own. And at first, that voice might be uncertain. It may try to justify giving up, but if you sit with it, push through it, something stronger begins to speak. The voice of direction, of resolve. That's where discipline becomes internal. Self-discipline without witnesses is not glamorous. It's rarely talked about because it doesn't entertain anyone. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's simply repeated, quietly, daily, with no reward other than the development of personal integrity. You keep the promise you made to yourself, not because anyone is keeping score, but because you respect your own word. That alone transforms you. What once felt like sacrifice starts to feel like alignment. You no longer chase the emotional spike of being seen. You chase the steadiness of being whole. At some point, the discomfort of not being seen turns into peace. You begin to appreciate the stillness that once felt like emptiness. You start to value the solitude that once felt like exile, because you realize that in that space, you are finally free to build without interference. You're no longer performing, you're constructing. Each day becomes a quiet affirmation of who you've chosen to be. You're not asking anyone to notice. You're not hoping someone will say, "I see what you're doing." You've stopped needing that. And that absence of need becomes strength. When you no longer need applause, something else begins to grow. Momentum. Real, steady, self-fueled motion. It's not fast. It's not loud. But it doesn't stop. It doesn't stall when the world goes quiet. It doesn't fall apart when no one claps. That kind of momentum is rare, and it's powerful. Because it's sustainable. It carries you when mood fails, when energy dips, when doubt creeps in. Because it's not built on emotion, it's built on evidence. Evidence that you show up, that you do the work, that you follow through. And that evidence creates something no one can give you. Trust in yourself. You begin to feel different. You walk into rooms not needing to prove anything. You engage with the world, not from hunger, but from fullness. You don't need to tell people who you are. They feel it. Because there's a calmness that comes with knowing you've kept your promises in the dark, that you've done what needed to be done, not for recognition, but because you said you would. That's not arrogance, it's alignment, it's dignity, and it's earned. There's freedom in that consistency. You start to realize how many people are still trapped in the need to be seen, how many delay their growth because they're waiting for permission, how many abandon their routines the moment recognition fades. And you don't judge them, you just recognize that you're not there anymore. You've stepped out of that cycle. You've stopped asking for motivation. You've stopped checking in with your mood. You just show up. You act because the action is aligned, because the standard is yours and it's fixed. Seneca once wrote, "Nothing, to my way of thinking, is better proof of a well-ordered mind than a man's ability to stop just where he is and pass some time in his own company." What he described isn't just peace, it's power. The ability to sit with your own effort and know it's enough. To sit in the quiet after a disciplined day and not reach for distraction or praise. Just presence, just steadiness. That's the gift of discipline without performance. It teaches you how to live in alignment without needing applause to feel alive. And yes, it's hard. At first, it will feel like no one cares, like your effort is invisible, like your work doesn't matter. But it does, because it's changing you. Every choice, every repetition, every silent decision, it's becoming you. And in time, that will be more valuable than any round of applause ever could be. Because you won't just appear disciplined, you'll be it. Not when people are watching, not when the lights are on, but always. Even in the dark, especially in the dark. There's a moment when you realize that motivation has been lying to you. It made big promises, that one good video, one intense quote, one sharp emotional spike would be enough to carry you through. And maybe it did, for a day, maybe two. But the truth always shows up after the music fades, when the feeling disappears, and you're left with the question, who are you when the mood is gone? Because that's where the real work starts. When the excitement leaves and it's just you and the routine, that's when you discover whether this is something you feel like doing or something you've become. Motivation is fleeting, but identity stays. And the moment you stop needing to feel inspired in order to act is the moment you step into something permanent. Motivation needs a reason. Identity doesn't. It moves because that's who it is now. It wakes up early, not because it's excited every day, but because it made a quiet agreement that it keeps. It shows up in discomfort. It repeats the boring parts. It doesn't flinch when no one notices. Identity isn't a feeling. It's a decision repeated enough times that it turns into instinct. That's what makes it stronger than motivation. That's what makes it reliable. Because feelings change. But principles, when chosen consciously, anchor you. When your effort continues without recognition, without feedback, without an audience, something important happens. It starts to become solid. It's no longer fragile, no longer something that breaks the moment you're tired, or discouraged, or not in the mood. It holds. It carries you. And when your effort becomes reliable, your life begins to move in a rhythm that doesn't depend on outside energy. You build your own pace, your own structure, and that structure becomes momentum, not a rush, not a burst, a steady, quiet force that doesn't stop just because the day is hard. That's the difference most people never learn to make. They wait for the surge of energy to come before they move, and when it doesn't, they think something's wrong. But nothing is wrong. They've just built their system on a foundation that can't hold weight. That's why their actions collapse as soon as life stops cooperating. When you build on motivation, your progress has mood swings. But when you build on identity, it doesn't matter what the weather looks like outside. The internal climate holds. People often confuse who they are with how they feel. But feelings are temporary. They pass through. They don't define you unless you let them dictate your choices. The person who acts only when they feel like it is a prisoner to their own chemistry, but the person who acts from principle, who decides who they are in advance and then lives according to that standard, is free. Not because they never struggle, but because their struggle has structure. It has a backbone. That's what separates the consistent from the inconsistent, the reliable from the reactive. Reliability doesn't mean perfection. It means you know what you're anchored to. And even when life throws you off course, you know how to return. You know how to correct without collapsing. You trust yourself to show up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That kind of self-trust isn't built in one day. It's earned over time, one honest repetition at a time, and when enough of those repetitions stack, something inside of you begins to shift. You no longer ask yourself, "Do I feel like doing this today?" You just do it, because it's who you are now. Momentum begins quietly. You won't feel it at first. There's no sudden click, no major event that tells you you've changed. It happens in the background, like a shift in posture, like a change in your breathing. You just realize one day that the things that used to be difficult have become non-negotiable. Not because someone's watching, not because you're chasing a reward, but because the behavior matches your identity. That's a powerful place to live from. It's not about grinding harder. It's about being honest enough to ask, what am I building every time I repeat this? At some point, effort becomes normal, not dramatic, not heroic, just part of who you are. Like brushing your teeth, like getting dressed in the morning. You don't debate it. You don't stall. You move. And that movement keeps the mind clean. It keeps you away from the trap of overthinking, from the emotional weight of inconsistency. You don't have to negotiate with yourself anymore. You already decided. Now you're just following through. Seneca said, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But preparation is only possible when you've trained yourself to act without needing emotional permission. That training is slow, it's invisible, and it's rarely applauded. But it's what makes you capable of sustaining progress when others burn out. It's what allows you to keep going when motivation dies, because it will. Motivation will die 100 deaths before you reach anything worthwhile, but identity doesn't die. It carries. The person who continues without recognition becomes formidable. They don't rise and fall with the applause. They don't wait for momentum. They bring it. They create it. Not in one grand moment, but in every repetition no one sees. That's how you know it's real. That's how you know it will last. Not because it looks impressive, but because it holds up under pressure. When the noise stops, when the crowd disappears, when the feelings fade, you're still there. Doing the work, not because it's easy, not because it's fun every time, but because it's you now, and you trust that version of yourself more than any temporary mood, and that trust becomes your edge. While others are distracted by how they feel, you stay close to what you've chosen, and while they wait for another spike of inspiration, you've already built a rhythm they can't keep up with, because your progress doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. That's the strength of identity. It doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It just shows up. Again and again and again. Most people spend more time explaining what they're going to do than actually doing it. They talk about their plans as if the words themselves were a form of progress. They outline intentions in group chats, hint at their ambitions on social media, and rehearse possible outcomes in their minds over and over. It feels productive, it feels like motion, but it's not. It's noise, and that noise has a cost. Every explanation leaks energy, because the more you verbalize your intent without execution, the more your brain begins to mistake talk for action. You feel a false sense of completion before the real work even begins. This is where so many dreams stall, in the in-between, the space between idea and execution, not because the person lacks talent or resources, but because they get stuck looking for confirmation, reassurance, validation, a nod from the outside world that it's okay to begin. But approval is a trap. It gives you a short-term comfort that delays long-term momentum. When you need someone else to tell you it's the right time, you've already surrendered the steering wheel, and when you stop acting from your own inner compass, you drift. There's something powerful about keeping your plans to yourself, not out of secrecy, but out of discipline. When you hold your intention in silence, it gathers strength, it sharpens, it doesn't leak. That silence becomes your edge. It protects your energy from scattering into conversations that don't need to happen. It keeps you from being swayed by the noise of opinions. It teaches you how to move without being seen. And that ability, to move quietly and consistently, is rare. Explanation often comes from a place of insecurity. It's a shield, a way to justify or preempt judgment before it arrives. We say what we're going to do so that people will expect something from us, and that expectation feels like pressure, but also like permission. But here's the truth. The more you rely on external permission to begin, the less likely you are to finish. Because pressure from others is unstable, it fades. And when it fades, so does your urgency. What you really need is internal clarity. That kind of clarity doesn't need to be said. It moves through action. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." That line is a challenge. It invites you to live with such alignment that your behavior speaks for itself. No need for disclaimers, no need for announcements, just action, repeated action. And the more you repeat without explaining, the more focused your mind becomes. You stop wasting time narrating what you're about to do, and instead let the work tell the story. We're conditioned to overshare. We live in a world that celebrates transparency, constant updates, and public journeys. And yes, sometimes that builds connection, but too often it becomes a distraction. A way to get quick hits of attention in exchange for your long-term momentum. You give away the mystery. You dilute the depth of your ambition by letting too many people into the room before you've even built the foundation. There's strength in restraint, and when you learn to hold that boundary, you give yourself room to grow without the pressure of being seen too early. Results are louder than promises. They always have been. You don't need to hype yourself when your actions build something real. In fact, the quieter your path, the more powerful your arrival, because no one saw it coming. And more importantly, you didn't waste energy trying to convince anyone along the way. You kept it, you channeled it, and that energy, undiluted, becomes focus. A kind of focus that doesn't get rattled by opinions or slowed down by doubts. Seneca said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." In the same way, it's not the man who plans too little, but the man who needs too much external agreement, who loses momentum. Wanting to be understood, to be supported, to be reassured, it's natural. But when those needs take priority over movement, you stall, you overthink, and eventually you forget why you wanted it in the first place. The ambition turns stale, the clarity blurs. But when you commit to silent execution, something shifts. You move lighter, your mental space clears. You're not checking for reactions. You're not adjusting based on opinions. You're just doing the work. And that work compounds, quietly, powerfully. It builds something under the surface, like roots. And by the time people notice, it's already too late to stop you. You've become consistent, and consistency is a force very few people can compete with. The beauty of silence is that it doesn't demand, it doesn't beg, it just is. It operates without asking for attention. It trusts the process. It trusts the foundation. When you stop explaining, you start experiencing your own journey more clearly. There's no audience in your head, just you and the next step. And that clarity, free from noise, makes each step more intentional, more aligned, more real. Eventually, you realize that the less you explain, the more you produce. The less you narrate, the more you notice. The less you wait for permission, the faster you grow. And that shift from external narration to internal execution is where your life begins to transform. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a steady, focused one. The kind of transformation that doesn't fade because it wasn't built on approval. It was built on commitment. That's the message. That's the invitation. Let the silence sharpen you. Let your results speak in rooms you never entered. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You just need to be clear. And the clearest path is the one that moves without explaining itself. This is where everything starts to narrow, not in a way that limits you, but in a way that refines you. Focus begins as a choice, but it evolves into a way of life. At some point, you stop spreading your energy across every little notification, every argument, every headline screaming for your reaction. You start to pull it back, not out of arrogance, not because you think you're too good for the noise, but because you've seen the cost of your own scattered attention. You've lived the consequences of giving your energy to things that drain you instead of build you, and the deeper you reflect, the clearer it becomes. Attention is not just time, it's life force. Every scroll, every needless conversation, every impulse click, it all takes something from you. Not just seconds, but presence. Not just moments, but momentum. And at first, you don't notice the loss. It's subtle, like a leak in a pipe behind the wall, but over time, it adds up. And when your mind feels stretched thin, when everything feels urgent and nothing feels meaningful, it's usually because your focus has been hijacked. You've handed over the reins. You've become available to too much. But that changes when you stop seeking stimulation and start seeking substance, when you begin filtering the world through the lens of what truly matters to you. And in that filtering, something powerful happens. You realize you don't need to engage with everything that asks for your attention. In fact, most of it is noise. Loud, persistent, and meaningless. The kind of noise that fills your head but starves your soul. And when you start to tune it out, your mind starts to breathe again. And once you understand the value of your attention, you become selective. You don't argue with everyone who misunderstands you. You don't chase every trend. You don't try to keep up with everything. You let people be wrong about you. You let the world move at its chaotic pace while you move with calm intention. That's not detachment. It's discipline. It's knowing that not every fire needs your water. Not every battle deserves your sword. There's a kind of peace that comes with this clarity. A calm that doesn't come from avoiding life, but from knowing what parts of life are worth entering. You stop feeling guilty for not replying immediately. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop performing availability. Because real focus isn't loud. It doesn't explain itself. It just is. It's built in the choices you make when no one's watching, when you close a tab, when you turn off your phone, when you say no to something that might feel good now, but derails you later. And those choices, they build strength, quiet strength. Not the kind people praise on social media, but the kind that shows up when life gets hard. The kind that doesn't panic. The kind that knows where it stands. That's what focus does. It roots you. It removes the temptation to be everything for everyone and reminds you to be something solid for yourself. Tests will always come. People will always try to pull you into their storms. The world will keep asking for your reaction, but you'll learn to give it less. Not because you're cold, but because you're focused. because you've seen how far you've come when you stopped trying to manage everything and started managing yourself. And that self-management, that inner clarity, that's where real power begins. Epictetus taught, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." And that response, when grounded in focus, becomes steady. It becomes thoughtful. You stop living in a state of constant urgency. You don't rush. You move with purpose. You don't panic. You respond with calm. You don't react to everything because you've realized that not everything is worthy of you. This doesn't mean becoming rigid. It means becoming anchored. It means you've trained yourself to stay with what matters, even when distractions dance all around you. It means you know how to say, "Not now," without guilt. It means you've built a kind of internal silence that the world can't easily disturb. That silence, that focus, it's your shield, it's your clarity, it's your edge. Aristotle once said, "The energy of the mind is the essence of life, so where that energy flows, your life follows. And if your attention is scattered, your life feels scattered. If your attention is sharp, your life sharpens." That's not just philosophy, it's practice. Daily, intentional practice. Choosing again and again to be here, now, with what matters, rather than pulled away by what doesn't. Eventually, you stop asking, "Is this interesting?" and start asking, "Is this essential?" You stop chasing stimulation and start seeking alignment. And in that shift, life simplifies. It becomes clearer, not easier, but more meaningful. Because you're no longer consumed by everything. You're building something specific, something true. And that truth grows in the quiet spaces where focus lives. In today's world, everything seems to revolve around being seen. Value is often confused with visibility. The more likes, views, and responses something gets, the more it's believed to matter. This kind of thinking creates a silent pressure, a need to prove your worth through reaction, not through reality. And without realizing it, you start to chase impressions instead of improvement. You begin to equate recognition with progress. And without that recognition, it feels like you're not moving at all. But real growth doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't need a witness. It simply needs consistency. And the more you internalize that truth, the more free you become from the emotional swings that come with external approval. You start to understand the difference between being known and being whole. Being known is a surface-level transaction. Being whole is an inner state that doesn't need validation to exist. The moment you stop measuring your efforts by how others respond, you take back your power. It's not about becoming indifferent, it's about becoming steady. Your worth no longer depends on the mood of the crowd. It doesn't rise when they cheer or crash when they're silent. That kind of inner stability is rare and powerful. It allows you to keep building even when no one's watching, even when the numbers are low, even when it feels like no one understands what you're trying to do. There's something deeply grounding about that shift. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop depending. You stop handing your self-respect over to strangers and start holding it in your own hands. You begin to live by your own standards, to measure progress by depth, not by noise. And that depth can't be seen on a screen. It's found in how you show up when things are hard, how you carry yourself when there's no reward waiting, how you speak to yourself when things don't go your way. When you begin to own your emotions instead of outsourcing them to the opinions of others, everything begins to quiet down. Not in a dull way, but in a peaceful one. This doesn't mean that feedback isn't useful. It can be. But it's not your compass. It's not your oxygen. It's just a perspective. Something you can consider without being consumed by it. The danger is when feedback becomes fuel, when you only move forward if someone claps. That's when you lose control of your own direction. That's when your identity starts to drift, bending and twisting to match what gets the best response. And once that begins, it's hard to stop. Because the more you shape yourself to please others, the more distant you become from your core. You become reactive, fragile, always adjusting, always unsure. But when you anchor yourself in something deeper, something internal, you begin to gain strength. You stop chasing pace and start trusting rhythm, your own rhythm, the one that doesn't rush, doesn't panic, and doesn't compete. The one that focuses on building something real. That's what emotional ownership is. It's the ability to feel everything without being ruled by any of it, to stay present without being pulled, to hear criticism without collapsing, to feel praise without becoming dependent on it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." When you always crave more attention, more reaction, more praise, you stay poor in peace. But when you learn to be full without being filled by others, you find a kind of richness that no metric can measure. And it shows in how you work, in how you show up, in how you carry your own silence like armor, not to block people out, but to hold your space firmly. You begin to notice how much emotional energy was being drained by comparison, how much time was being lost scrolling, reacting, wondering what others thought. And in that awareness, you make space. You begin to reclaim that energy for creation, for stillness, for clarity. You don't stop caring, you just stop leaking. You become more efficient with your emotions, more aware of when you're giving away power and when you're keeping it. And every time you choose ownership, you grow. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." That's the cost of real growth. Not everyone will get it, not everyone will see it, but that's the point. You're not here to convince everyone. You're here to become someone. And that journey is more internal than external. The rewards are often invisible at first. Confidence that no one sees, boundaries that no one understands, strength that doesn't need to flex. But over time they become the very things that shape your life in a direction that no applause ever could. There's a quiet power in being misunderstood and still choosing to stay your course. There's strength in not reacting, in not defending yourself against every opinion, in letting go of the need to be seen as right or good or successful. That silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the space between stimulus and response. It's where freedom lives. And when you live from that space, you stop being controlled by moods, trends, and other people's expectations. You begin to trust the work, not the reaction. You begin to trust yourself, not the outcome. And bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like continuing without attention. Sometimes it sounds like silence after a storm of opinion. Sometimes it feels like holding your ground when everything inside you wants to explain, to justify, to be liked. But freedom is found in restraint, in walking away from the need to be validated, in remembering that visibility without substance is hollow, but substance without visibility is still real. So you keep going, not because you're being watched, but because you've decided that your path matters, that your growth is worth more than their reaction, that your peace is not up for negotiation. And with every quiet decision to keep building, you separate yourself from the noise. You stop being a performer and start becoming a presence. One that doesn't fade when the spotlight does, one that endures. Because it was never built for display, it was built for truth. Most of the time, the thing holding you back isn't the task in front of you. It's not the complexity of the project or the amount of time it's going to take. It's the emotional weight wrapped around it. That invisible tension. The hesitation that whispers you're not ready. The self-doubt that tells you someone else could do it better. The quiet craving for someone to tell you it's okay to move forward. These are the real blocks. not the work itself, but the feelings underneath it. And when you start to notice that, something shifts. You stop treating setbacks as proof that you're not good enough and start seeing them for what they are: emotional reactions, not immovable walls. There's a moment when you finally understand that hesitation doesn't mean stop. It just means discomfort. And discomfort isn't a warning. It's a signal that you're leaving the familiar. The brain doesn't resist the work. It resists the unknown. It resists the vulnerability of doing something that might not be perfect, of stepping forward without applause, without a guarantee. But once you stop needing to feel fully confident before acting, the game changes. You don't wait for motivation. You don't stall for clarity. You act in spite of the noise. And that's when the most powerful kind of progress begins. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, but builds quietly behind the scenes. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That hesitation, that fear, that self-doubt, they don't just appear out of nowhere. They come from patterns buried deep. But the more you move through them without needing to resolve every emotion first, the more they loosen their grip. You begin to see that you don't need to fix every feeling to take the next step. You just need to stop making your emotions the permission slip for your action. And the more you do that, the more consistent you become. Not because you feel better, but because you stopped waiting to feel perfect. There's a quiet kind of power that comes with consistency. Not the glamorous kind that gets noticed right away, but the durable kind. The kind that survives bad days, low moods, slow weeks. Because it's not built on emotional highs. It's built on commitment. A decision you made once that you now keep making. And the more you keep making it, the less dramatic the process becomes. You're not riding the roller coaster anymore. You're walking the path, one step at a time. No rush, no panic, just steady repetition. And over time, that repetition becomes rhythm. That rhythm becomes momentum. And that momentum becomes identity. That's how you build something that lasts, not in bursts of intensity, but in waves of repetition, even when it's boring, especially when it's boring, because that's where most people stop. That's where they doubt themselves. They confuse boredom with failure. But boredom is just silence, and silence is where depth grows. If you can keep going when it's no longer exciting, you separate yourself from most. You prove to yourself that you're not doing it for dopamine, you're doing it because it matters. And that's when results start to compound, not loudly, but inevitably. The emotional challenge always comes first. The task becomes hard when your mindset resists it. But if you remove the emotional need for reassurance, the task shrinks. It becomes just another thing to do, not a test of your worth, not a referendum on your potential, just a task, one that you're capable of doing, whether or not it feels perfect, whether or not it gets recognized, whether or not you're fully in the mood. That shift is everything. It gives you control, it gives you movement. Progress doesn't have to be fast to be real. It doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. The strongest progress often hides in plain sight. It looks like showing up again, doing the thing again, making a small adjustment, not a dramatic pivot. Saying no to one more distraction, saying yes to one more rep, choosing consistency over novelty, choosing process over emotion. And the more you choose those things, the less resistance you feel. Not because the resistance disappears, but because you stop negotiating with it. You stop giving it the microphone. Aristotle once wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. That repetition isn't glamorous. It's not made for display, but it works. Every quiet step you take adds weight to your momentum, and over time that weight turns into gravity. Your effort starts to pull things toward you. Results, confidence, clarity. not because you forced them, but because you made space for them through consistency. That's the power of emotional discipline. It transforms chaos into order. It turns potential into progress. It allows you to work through the noise without being swallowed by it. Eventually, you realize you don't need to wait for the fear to disappear. You just need to keep moving while it's there. You don't need to feel confident to do something valuable. You don't need to be affirmed to create something meaningful. When you remove the emotional charge from your setbacks, they lose their ability to slow you down. They become part of the process, not a pause button. And the more you treat them that way, the less intimidating they become. You start to trust yourself more, not because you never doubt, but because you act even when you do. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." That's the simplicity we often forget. Say it, then do it, not explain it. Not wait for the right time. Not wait for someone to nod in approval. Just do it. And then do it again. Consistency is not about being in the mood. It's about being in alignment with your goals, with your values, with your identity. And the more often you align those things, the less space there is for hesitation. So much of life is built on quiet repetition. Not massive breakthroughs, but subtle, steady reinforcement. Doing the small things that build big strength. That strength doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself. In how you respond to a rough morning, in how you keep going after being overlooked, in how you rebuild your rhythm after a setback. And that strength compounds, slowly, silently, powerfully. That's how real growth happens. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, where no one is watching, where you keep showing up, just because you said you would. At some point, you stop looking outward for the signal to move. You stop waiting for someone to cheer you on, to approve your plan, or to give you a reason to start. You begin to understand that no one else can give you permission to live your own life. That moment, quiet and almost invisible to the world, marks a shift, because now you're the one steering. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean turning cold or becoming self-centered. It means accepting that your direction is your duty. No one else can carry that weight for you. And once that truth lands, it starts to reshape how you move through the world. When you take that kind of ownership, the excuses fall away. Not because you've suddenly become flawless, but because blaming others no longer feels useful. You begin to notice how often energy is wasted on trying to explain setbacks, trying to justify inaction, or waiting for circumstances to become ideal. But maturity isn't found in the perfect conditions. It's found in the decision to act despite them. You become the one who steps in when things drift off course, not because it's easy, but because no one else will do it for you. That's not pressure, that's power. It's easy to take action when everything feels aligned, when you're motivated, when there's a clear reward, when others are watching. But that's not where strength is built. Strength is built in the moments when no one is paying attention, when the spark is gone and the only thing left is your own standard. You get up and do the work because you said you would. You reflect, adjust, and recommit, not to impress anyone, but to stay true to the person you're becoming. It's subtle. There's no loud celebration, just a quiet, steady force growing inside of you, the kind that doesn't need validation. And then there's the part no one talks about, the fading of enthusiasm. At the start of any journey, there's excitement, a rush. You feel unstoppable, but it never lasts. The motivation fades. The routine sets in, and suddenly it feels like a grind. This is the point where most people drift. They confuse boredom with misalignment. They think the fading excitement means they've chosen wrong, but really it's just the next stage. Growth isn't always thrilling, it's often repetitive. But that repetition, done with intention, is what transforms you. You become consistent, not because you're always inspired, but because you've learned how to move without it. Maturity is choosing growth when staying the same would be easier. It's not a single decision, but a pattern of decisions. It's knowing that setbacks will come, and meeting them not with panic, but with presence. You've seen it before, you know how it feels, but you also know how to respond. That's the difference. It's the subtle strength of someone who doesn't need life to be perfect to keep evolving. You don't need ideal circumstances, you need clarity. And clarity comes from within, from your values, your priorities, your chosen direction. Wisdom, like maturity, is intentional. It's earned by paying attention, by noticing where you hesitate, where you react, where you avoid, and then gently confronting those patterns, not all at once, but piece by piece. You don't need to be flawless to be in control, you just need to be honest. Honest enough to see when you're drifting, and committed enough to steer yourself back, so you stop outsourcing the responsibility for your life. You stop blaming your past, your environment, or your circumstances, not because they don't matter, but because they're not in control anymore. You are, and when that realization becomes a habit, everything changes. Not because life gets easier, but because you become stronger, more steady, more focused, more you. And the world might not notice right away. That's okay, because this path isn't about being seen. It's about being aligned. You're not here to prove something, you're here to build something, quietly, steadily, on your own terms. That's what focus really means. That's what maturity really looks like. In the silence, without anyone watching, excuses lose their power. There's no applause to chase, no one to impress, and no one waiting for you to slip up. It's just you. And that truth, no audience to perform for, suddenly puts you in the driver's seat of your own life. No one's judging your effort. No one's questioning your pace. It's just the work, the day, and your commitment to showing up no matter what. In those moments, the need to explain yourself falls away. You stop looking for external validation and you start looking inward. That's when everything changes. Because now, it's not about whether someone else thinks you're doing enough. It's about your own standards. Standards aren't affected by how many people are watching. They're not swayed by applause or the quiet hum of approval. Standards are internal. They're the rules you live by when no one else is around to enforce them. And when you stop waiting for someone else to hold you accountable, you find the true power of self-governance. Because motivation is fleeting. It's a spark that burns brightly and fades quickly. But standards, they're a fire that keeps burning, steady and enduring. The difference is subtle but powerful. Motivation is a push from the outside. It comes from the desire for approval, the need for validation, the hope that someone will notice. But standards come from within. They're set by you, and only you. You've probably experienced it before, those days when motivation feels like it's nowhere to be found, when the energy just isn't there. But the work doesn't stop because you don't feel like it, and it doesn't stop because no one's applauding. The work continues because you've decided that it matters to you. You've set a standard for yourself, and now it's your job to meet it, regardless of how you feel. This is where growth really happens, when the external noise fades away, and what you do is driven by your internal compass, not the reactions of others. As Carl Jung wisely said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who you truly are isn't shaped by the reactions of others. It's shaped by the quiet, consistent decisions you make when no one is watching. It's shaped by the standards you set for yourself and by the relentless commitment to meeting those standards, no matter how mundane or challenging the task may be. Your identity isn't defined by applause. It's defined by consistency. The real strength, the real growth, comes when you no longer need an audience to keep moving forward. The beauty of having no one to impress is that the only person you're working for is yourself. You stop looking outward for confirmation that you're on the right path. Instead, you begin to rely on your internal sense of purpose and direction. It's no longer about making sure others see your progress. It's about knowing that you're doing the right thing, regardless of whether anyone else acknowledges it. And that's where the real power lies, because now your growth is not dependent on anyone else's approval. It's rooted in your own standards. And those standards shape your behavior. They guide your decisions, your actions, and your reactions. When you know what you stand for, when you're clear on your values, everything else falls into place. You don't need to be constantly motivated because you have a solid foundation. You know what's expected of you, and you meet that expectation day in and day out. This is where true discipline is born, not from the desire to be recognized, but from the internal commitment to live by your own standards. And that discipline, over time, becomes second nature. It doesn't feel like a struggle. It becomes your way of living. Seneca put it perfectly when he said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." When you stop waiting for others to judge you, when you stop relying on their reactions to guide your behavior, you become your own master. You set your own course. And that's when you truly begin to control your life. Not in the sense of controlling everything around you, but in the sense of controlling how you respond to what happens. You stop being a passive participant in your own story. You become the author. And the more you live by your standards, the less you're affected by what's going on around you. The opinions of others become irrelevant. The need to explain yourself becomes unnecessary. You act because it's right, not because it's approved. You'll notice something powerful as you keep living this way. The more you focus on your own standards, the more stable you become. Your mood doesn't rise and fall with outside feedback. You don't get swept up by praise or crushed by criticism. You remain anchored, centered, and clear on what you need to do. You begin to trust yourself, and trust is what makes consistency possible. When you trust that your standards will guide you, you stop second-guessing yourself. You stop hesitating. You stop wasting energy on doubts and fears. Instead, you use that energy to take action, to move forward, and to keep improving. This isn't a passive process. It's an active daily commitment to showing up for yourself, regardless of the circumstances. It's about recognizing that the only opinion that matters is your own. The world doesn't need to see you working to know that you're progressing. Your progress is visible in the way you show up, in the way you handle challenges, and in the way you keep moving forward, even when the world seems silent. And over time, you begin to see the results of that consistency. You stop waiting for others to validate your worth. You stop depending on external motivation, and in its place, you find a deeper, more sustainable drive, one that comes from within. Your standards become the foundation upon which you build everything, and because they are yours, they are unshakable. In the end, you realize that this is the true power, not needing an audience to keep going, not needing external validation to prove that you're worthy, but instead creating your own worth through your standards, your actions, and your commitment to yourself. When you no longer need to be seen to be valuable, you become unstoppable, and that is the ultimate freedom. Over time, something incredible happens. You begin to stabilize. The emotional roller coaster that once defined your days, driven by the need for approval or fear of rejection, starts to quiet down. The highs aren't as high, and the lows aren't as low. Praise no longer inflates you, and neglect no longer diminishes you. You stop needing to prove your worth to anyone. That shift, though subtle, is transformative. It's the shift from being dependent on external feedback to becoming anchored in your own sense of self. It's a deep, almost imperceptible evolution that happens when you stop measuring your value by how others perceive you. At first, it's a struggle. We're all conditioned to look outward for validation, to search for signs of approval or recognition, and there's nothing wrong with that, until it becomes the only source of our confidence, until we tie our worth to the fleeting opinions of others. But as you keep practicing this inner alignment, you stop reacting to the fluctuations of the outside world. The praise, the criticism, the attention, it no longer carries the weight it once did. Instead of feeding off of external sources to maintain your stability, you start drawing that stability from within. You realize that your worth doesn't depend on others seeing it. It's already there, grounded in who you are. This peace doesn't come from everything being perfect. It comes from understanding that imperfection is part of the process. It's about accepting the ebb and flow of life without being swept away by it. You stop trying to control the outside world and start focusing on what you can control: your response, your actions, and your mindset. When you stop relying on the external to shape your internal world, something shifts. You become the center of your own universe, and that center is unshakable. As you continue on this journey, discipline stops being something you force yourself to do. It stops feeling like a chore, something you have to try hard at. It becomes a natural extension of who you are. This isn't to say that you never feel tempted to slack off or lose focus, but the desire to do so doesn't derail you the way it once might have. You're no longer constantly battling your impulses. You're simply living from a place of discipline because it aligns with who you've become. The struggle is no longer there because you've made peace with it. This is where true mastery begins. You stop trying to be disciplined because you've already become it. Discipline no longer feels like something you're forcing yourself to do. It's just how you live. It's the quiet foundation of your day, woven into every action, every decision. You don't have to think about it constantly. It just flows naturally from your inner sense of purpose and responsibility. You've built the habits, the mindset, and the focus that sustain your discipline without the need for constant motivation. Seneca wisely wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality," and that's often the case with discipline. We imagine that it will always feel like a battle. We expect it to be hard, exhausting, and relentless. But once you've integrated discipline into your life, it stops feeling like a fight. It's just what you do. It becomes part of your rhythm, like breathing. You don't fight to breathe. You don't have to remind yourself to breathe. It's just automatic. And in the same way, once you've cultivated the right mindset, discipline becomes automatic too. The key to this transformation is understanding that discipline is not about perfection. It's about consistency. It's about showing up day after day, without needing recognition, without needing approval. It's about doing the work because it matters, because it aligns with your values and your goals. And when you do this consistently, it becomes effortless. Not in the sense that it's always easy, but in the sense that it becomes second nature. This shift can be profound because it frees you from the emotional dependency that often comes with external validation. You stop seeking approval because you no longer need it. You stop measuring your progress by others' reactions. You measure it by your own growth, by how far you've come from where you started. And that's incredibly powerful because it's based entirely on your own standards, not on the whims of others. This is not a call to ignore the world around you, but to stop letting it dictate your self-worth. You still engage with others. You still seek connection, but you no longer depend on them to validate your existence. You no longer need their applause to know you're on the right path. Your validation comes from within, and that inner validation is far more solid and reliable than anything external could ever be. You stop reacting to the noise and start living from your own internal compass. As you continue on this journey, the shifts become more subtle but more significant. You become less reactive, more present. You stop getting swept away by your emotions or by what others think. You learn to observe your thoughts and feelings without letting them control you. This is where the real power lies, in the ability to remain steady, to stay grounded, no matter what happens around you. This is where maturity begins. It's the moment when you realize that your sense of self doesn't have to be dependent on anyone else's approval. You are enough, just as you are. And that's when your true strength begins to show. Internal stability changes everything. It's not something you announce to the world. In fact, it often goes unnoticed. The transformation begins subtly, in the way you move through your day, in how you approach life's challenges. You stop reacting to every bump in the road. You no longer need to tell everyone about every step you're taking. The way you speak becomes more intentional, more purposeful. You don't waste words. You don't feel the need to explain yourself, to justify your actions. Instead, your words carry weight because they're chosen carefully. Your actions become your message. There's no need for dramatic gestures or elaborate explanations. You simply do what needs to be done, with quiet confidence. The world may not notice right away, but in that silence, you are building something far more powerful than any applause could offer. This shift is profound, and it comes from within. It's the result of no longer needing to seek validation, no longer waiting for someone else to affirm your choices. Instead of constantly looking outside of yourself for approval, you become the source of your own confidence. You stop over-explaining your thoughts or motives. You stop waiting for someone to understand your vision. Instead, you quietly get to work, moving in the direction you've set for yourself. There's a peace that comes with this, a strength in knowing you don't have to prove anything. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. We're all conditioned to seek some form of recognition for our efforts. It feels good to hear someone say, "Well done," or "You're on the right track." But over time, you realize that these external affirmations are fleeting. They don't sustain you. They don't help you in those moments when things get difficult, when the path ahead feels unclear. That's why relying on internal stability is so crucial. It's the only thing that lasts. It's the only thing that can keep you grounded when external circumstances shift. And it's this internal strength that allows you to move through life with a quiet kind of power. Doing the work without expecting anything in return, adjusting without getting lost in failure, and acting without needing to announce your every step. You start to notice the difference in how you interact with others. You no longer feel the need to explain every decision, every move you make. Instead, you let your actions speak for themselves. The more you build this internal foundation, the more your focus shifts. It's no longer about convincing others, about seeking their approval. It's about doing what's necessary, staying true to your own path, and letting the results show for themselves. And while others may not notice immediately, that's actually the beauty of it. You're not doing this for them. You're doing it for you. It's a quiet confidence, a steady resolve that doesn't need to be broadcast to the world. You adjust without drama, without creating a spectacle. Failure no longer feels like a crisis. It becomes just another part of the process. Instead of letting it shake your confidence, you learn from it, adjust, and keep moving forward. This is the kind of internal stability that doesn't crumble when things get tough. It's the kind that becomes unshakable over time. And once you have it, once you stop reacting to every setback and start adjusting quietly, your life begins to move in a new direction. a direction that is yours to define. When you become this steady force, people notice, but not in the way you might expect. They don't see the struggle, the doubts, or the internal conflicts you've worked through. They see the results, the quiet, unrelenting forward motion. They see you as someone who is not easily swayed by external opinions, who doesn't need validation to continue doing the work. And the truth is, that's exactly the kind of person you become. One whose actions speak louder than any words, whose integrity is evident even in the silence. You've reached a point where your own sense of self is not up for debate. This is the beauty of internal stability. It makes everything else feel lighter. You no longer have to fight for every inch of progress. You no longer need to explain every decision. You simply trust that your choices are aligned with who you are, and you move forward. There's an effortless quality to this that is rooted in discipline, not effort. It's the kind of discipline that doesn't require reminding. It just is. It's a part of you, woven into the fabric of your life, guiding you through the highs and lows without being knocked off course. At the heart of all this is the understanding that your worth doesn't come from outside. It doesn't come from the applause or the recognition of others. It comes from knowing who you are, from staying true to your values, and from living in alignment with your purpose. This is the real power, not the power that comes from being seen or heard, but the power that comes from being grounded in who you truly are. And when you live from that place, everything else becomes secondary. You stop trying to impress anyone because you've already impressed yourself with your own commitment to your growth. You stop looking for external validation because you've already found the only validation that matters, your own self-respect. So, as you continue to build this internal strength, remember that it's not about the big dramatic moments. It's about the quiet consistency. It's about the way you move through life, unshaken by the distractions of the world. It's about doing the work, making the adjustments, and staying steady, even when no one is watching. This is where real growth happens, not in the spotlight, but in the silent hours when you're alone with your thoughts, your decisions, and your discipline. This is the kind of power that stays with you, that continues to grow, no matter what's happening around you. And this is the kind of power that no one can take away. When nobody cares, comparison loses its grip on you. You stop measuring your progress against the success or failures of others. You stop feeling like you're falling behind because someone else seems to be moving faster or achieving more. The timelines of others no longer define your sense of urgency or accomplishment. Instead, you turn inward. The only reference point that matters is your own alignment. When you align with your values, your goals, and your purpose, everything else becomes background noise. The distractions of other people's achievements fade, and what you're left with is a quiet, steady focus on the path you've chosen. It's liberating, isn't it? To stop racing against the clock of someone else's life and start running your own race, on your own terms. This is where real growth happens, when you take yourself out of the equation of competition and instead place yourself in the equation of self-actualization. You begin to ask yourself, am I being true to who I am? Am I moving in the direction that aligns with my inner values? Or am I chasing something that's not even mine to begin with? This internal shift changes everything. No longer do you measure your worth by how others see you or what they've accomplished. You start to see that your worth comes from something far deeper, something that has nothing to do with external validation. Carl Jung put it this way: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that's exactly what happens when you stop comparing yourself to others. You start to become who you truly are. You shed the layers of influence that the world has piled on you, telling you who you should be, what you should achieve, and when you should get there. When you stop worrying about how you measure up to someone else's timeline, you create the space to truly listen to yourself, to your intuition, and to the rhythm of your own life. And in that space, you realize that the only timeline that matters is the one you create for yourself. When you're no longer concerned with where others are on their journey, you gain clarity about where you're going. The fog of comparison lifts, and decisions become simpler. You start to realize that what once seemed like huge obstacles are actually just part of the process. You stop hesitating because you understand that hesitation comes from trying to measure up to an external standard. But when you focus on alignment, hesitation fades. You know what you need to do. You know where you need to go. The path becomes clear because it's yours. This shift doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. With every step you take in the direction of alignment, the noise around you grows quieter. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. After all, we've been taught to look outside ourselves for validation, for approval, for direction. But when you shift that focus inward, something powerful happens. You begin to trust yourself more. You begin to trust your judgment, your intuition, and your ability to handle whatever comes your way. And that trust becomes the foundation for all your decisions. Your direction sharpens like a laser. It's no longer blurry or diluted by outside opinions. You can feel the difference. You stop second-guessing yourself, not because everything is easy, but because you know deep down that you're on the right path. Your decisions are no longer clouded by fear of failure or the need to impress anyone. You begin to make choices that are aligned with your deeper truth, and each decision builds upon the last. There's momentum in that kind of clarity. Once you stop measuring your progress against anyone else's, you realize that you're no longer rushing to keep up. You're no longer chasing someone else's version of success. Instead, you're creating your own. This doesn't mean you'll never face doubts. This doesn't mean everything will be easy, but it does mean that the doubts you face will be more manageable because they won't come from comparing yourself to others. They'll come from your own internal growth process, and you'll be able to handle them with a sense of peace and purpose. When you align with your own values, when you focus solely on your own path, those doubts don't define you. They simply become part of the journey. You understand that they don't stop you. They refine you. When you stop comparing yourself to others, you also stop measuring your success by what others are doing. Your success becomes more personal. It becomes about your growth, your effort, and your alignment with your core values. And this kind of success is far more meaningful because it's based on what you truly want, not what someone else has or what someone else thinks you should want. It's a success that feels fulfilling, not fleeting. As you move forward with this new perspective, your life begins to reflect your own standards. You stop measuring your worth by what others think or by what you think they expect. Instead, you stand firmly in your own identity. You stop trying to fit into someone else's mold, and instead, you create your own. And when you do that, you realize that comparison was never necessary. Your worth was never determined by anyone else's timeline, success, or judgment. It was always yours to define. So, what do you do with all of this newfound freedom? You use it. You act on it. You live in alignment with your truth and your vision. You stop hesitating. You stop waiting for approval, and you start living boldly. Your decisions become clear. Your purpose becomes stronger, and your sense of self becomes unshakable. And in that clarity, you find peace. In the end, when you stop comparing and start aligning, everything changes. Your direction becomes certain, your progress becomes steady, and you move forward with confidence. And that, my friend, is the true power of living on your own timeline. When nobody cares about your race, you realize you've been running the right one all along. pressure begins to feel different. At first, it feels like a threat, something to fear, something that could break you. But over time, when you shift your perspective, that pressure transforms. It doesn't feel like something you're running from anymore. It becomes a part of the process. It becomes like resistance training for the mind, something that strengthens you rather than overwhelms you. It's no longer something that weighs you down. Instead, it's something that builds you up. Each challenge, each setback, each pressure-filled moment becomes an opportunity to grow stronger, more resilient, and more grounded. This shift doesn't happen overnight. At first, you'll still feel the temptation to view pressure as something that needs to be avoided. But as you continue to embrace it, to face it head-on instead of shying away, you start to realize something profound. Pressure isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. It's the thing that shapes your character, refines your strength, and tests your resolve. And the more you learn to carry that pressure with grace, the more you start to understand that it's not about avoiding difficulty. It's about learning how to endure it, how to push through it without breaking. Carl Jung said, "The greater the obstacle, the more glory in overcoming it." This is the essence of that transformation. The greater the pressure, the greater the potential for growth. The moment you stop viewing pressure as something to escape from and start seeing it as something that shapes you, everything changes. You stop asking when things will get easier because you know that life isn't supposed to be easy. You start asking yourself, how will I carry myself through this? It's a subtle shift, but it's powerful. You move from being a passive participant in your own life, waiting for things to become comfortable, to being an active participant, determined to face whatever comes your way with strength and dignity. This is the moment when you stop relying on the world to make things easier for you. You stop waiting for external circumstances to shift in your favor. Instead, you take control of how you respond to everything that happens. You stop giving away your power to the things that are outside of your control. You realize that it's not the situation that defines you, but how you choose to respond to it. You no longer look for shortcuts or ways out. You start embracing the discomfort, knowing that on the other side of it, there's strength waiting for you. And with this shift, you begin to see that the pressure isn't just something you endure, it's something you use. You use it to sharpen your focus, to test your limits, to find out what you're truly made of. It's no longer something that overwhelms you. It becomes the fire that forges you. You start to view every obstacle as an opportunity to prove to yourself just how capable you are. And as you do, you build a quiet confidence, one that comes not from avoiding pressure, but from handling it with grace, composure, and determination. This doesn't mean you'll never feel tired or that things will always be easy, but it does mean that you'll begin to see pressure differently. You'll see it as a tool, a catalyst for growth. It won't be something that breaks you down. It will be something that builds you up. You'll stop asking, when will it get easier? Because you'll understand that it doesn't need to get easier for you to succeed. You'll realize that the real strength comes from learning how to carry yourself through the difficulty, to stand tall in the face of adversity, and to move forward despite the weight on your shoulders. The true test of character doesn't come in the moments of comfort. It comes when everything feels heavy, when the pressure is on, when the world is pushing against you. That's when you get to decide who you are. Will you crumble under the weight, or will you use it to build your strength? The more you face, the stronger you become. It's not about avoiding pressure. It's about learning how to use it to elevate yourself. The more pressure you face, the more you refine your ability to handle it. And in doing so, you become someone who can carry more, do more, and be more. This shift in perspective is transformative because it's not about changing the circumstances. It's about changing how you engage with them. It's about moving from a mindset of avoidance to one of mastery. You stop fearing the pressure and start seeing it as the force that sharpens you, as the thing that prepares you for greater things ahead. You stop asking for life to become easier and start asking yourself, how can I grow stronger through this? And when you reach that point, you'll realize that pressure no longer feels like a burden. It feels like the training ground for your personal power. Each challenge becomes a stepping stone, and every setback is just a lesson in resilience. You are no longer overwhelmed by life's difficulties because you've learned how to navigate them with inner strength. You've learned how to stand firm, how to bend without breaking, and how to keep moving forward no matter what. In the end, pressure doesn't have to be something that crushes you. It can be the thing that propels you forward, that molds you into the best version of yourself. When you stop asking when things will get easier and start focusing on how you'll carry yourself through them, everything changes. You stop being at the mercy of your circumstances. You become the one who shapes them. You stop waiting for external forces to make things right. You start taking responsibility for your own strength, for your own growth, and for your own journey. And that, my friend, is where true power lies. It's not in avoiding pressure. It's in learning how to carry it and use it to fuel your ascent. Eventually, focus becomes natural. It doesn't feel like something you have to force anymore. In the beginning, it takes discipline, conscious effort to ignore distractions and center your mind on what matters. But over time, that effort becomes second nature. It's like lifting weights for the mind. The first few reps are difficult, your focus wanders, and your attention slips. But gradually, it becomes easier. The mind begins to strengthen, and what was once a challenge becomes an automatic process. You stop struggling to keep your focus. Instead, it's the natural state of your mind. And once that happens, progress stops feeling like something you have to fight for. This shift isn't something that happens overnight. It's built over time, step by step. It's about the small, consistent actions that slowly shape your behavior. It's about the quiet moments when no one is watching, when you're still doing the work, even though there's no applause or recognition. These moments add up. They build momentum. And before you know it, the effort becomes expected. It becomes part of who you are. It's not a question of, will I do the work today? It becomes a given, something that simply happens because that's who you are now. You've become the person who doesn't wait for motivation to strike, the person who simply shows up and does the work, regardless of how they feel in the moment. This is what happens when you stop seeking permission to become the person you're meant to be. You stop waiting for some external validation or encouragement to tell you it's okay to move forward. You stop waiting for the perfect moment when everything lines up just right. You realize that you're already becoming that person. The shift happens when you stop seeking approval and start moving as if you're already that person. You embody the person you want to be. The transformation is no longer something you hope will happen. It's happening right now, through your actions, your discipline, and your consistency. And as you move forward, you begin to see that the silence that once felt heavy now feels protective. In the beginning, when you were starting this journey, the silence of not having anyone watching or cheering you on might have felt isolating, even uncomfortable. You might have wondered if it was worth it, if anyone would notice or care about the work you were putting in. But as you continue, the silence becomes something entirely different. It becomes a space where you can focus on the work itself, where you can create without external distractions or the need for approval. That silence, once uncomfortable, now feels like a shield, protecting your work, protecting your direction, and keeping you aligned with your goals. It's in this silence that you find your clarity. It's in this space where you're able to fine-tune your craft, sharpen your focus, and align every action with your greater purpose. Without the noise of external expectations, You begin to trust yourself more. You trust your own process, your own direction, and the longer you move in alignment with your true self, the less you need the validation of others. You've learned to rely on your own inner compass, and in doing so, the work becomes cleaner. It becomes more authentic. Your direction becomes more intact because it's rooted in your own values, not in the approval of others. This shift in focus from seeking validation to trusting your own process creates a deeper sense of peace. You stop questioning every step you take. You stop doubting yourself. Instead, you move forward with purpose, with a quiet confidence that doesn't need to be announced. The silence that once seemed daunting becomes the space where your work can thrive, where your ideas can flourish without being tainted by outside opinions. It's in this quiet, uninterrupted space that your best work is created, and as you continue to embrace this solitude, the work becomes more and more effortless. It's no longer something you struggle to do. It becomes part of who you are. The truth is, once you stop waiting for permission to be who you're becoming, you realize that the power was always in your hands. You are not waiting for a sign, a person, or a moment to validate your worth or your potential. You've already begun the process of becoming who you were meant to be. The work you're doing now is shaping your future self, and with each step you take, that future self becomes more real, more tangible. You stop doubting whether you can do it because you're already doing it. You stop wondering if you're good enough because you're proving to yourself every day that you are. This quiet confidence becomes the foundation of your success. And as you continue on this path, you begin to realize something else. Your growth, your progress, and your success are not dependent on anyone else. They're not contingent on whether others recognize or applaud your efforts. They're based on your own commitment, your own discipline, and your own ability to keep moving forward, even when no one is watching. You don't need others to tell you that you're on the right track. You can feel it within yourself. You know that you're aligned with your purpose, and that's all that matters. The more you embrace this internal confidence, the more you'll realize that you don't need to seek validation from others to feel fulfilled. You are the one who determines your worth, and you are the one who defines your success. This is where true power lies. Not in the applause of others, not in the recognition or validation you receive, but in the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and trusting your process. When you stop seeking permission to become who you're becoming, you unlock the freedom to live authentically, to create without limits, and to pursue your goals without hesitation. The silence, once a source of discomfort, becomes the space in which you can grow, evolve, and succeed. And in this space, you are free. You are free to become the person you were always meant to be. And that, my friend, is where the real journey begins. As you move forward, remember this: the power to shape your future is in your hands. No one else is coming to define your path. You are the architect of your own life. So stop waiting for permission. Stop seeking validation. Embrace the silence, trust your process, and keep moving forward with purpose. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal. If you're ready to dive even deeper into mastering your mind and finding true peace within, check out one of the suggested videos on the screen. Keep pushing, keep growing, and remember, the journey is yours to create.